and brilliant to be with you all. I hope that you're finding this time as being encouraging in your walk with God in the whole of life. The session I've got this morning is in the kind of kingdom and culture aspect of the focus that you're looking at. But I want to go kind of back to basics, as it were. So in the next 15, 20 minutes or so, I want to think about some fundamentals of what it means to find and follow God in a secular age. That's kind of where I'm going with this, and how we live faith in the moment, how we actually engage with God in our day-to-day. And then hopefully that will open up some possibilities of thinking about how we seek the kingdom. Because if we're not noticing God's presence, if we're not noticing God's nudgings to act in God's spirit, then we're unlikely to be in scenarios where we're noticing the kingdom or building the kingdom. Anyway, that's my logic behind this. So I'm going to use some slides to kind of give me some security and structure as I kind of go through thinking too. So we're thinking about faith in the everyday, living moment to moment for God in our everyday life. And my starting point is a philosopher called Charles Taylor that some of you might have heard of. Some of you might not even want to hear of a Canadian philosopher called Charles Taylor, but he's written some really influential and helpful works, big, thick doorstop books around what it means to hold faith in a secular age. And there are some good kind of précis of that work. There's a book by James Smith called How Not to Be Secular, which is a good kind of précis of Taylor's work. But what Taylor discusses, amongst many things, is he talks about that we all live now in a secular age, certainly in the West, as the predominant culture. And what that means, it means the conditions for holding faith are radically different. It's been emerging over time, but faith now is one choice of life and belief over others. It's not a given, it's not held widespread, it's often viewed just as a personal choice. But what happens as that has evolved is that the material world, the world we exist in, the immanent world against us, as he says here, is the key place that we live and we find meaning. We live in an immanent world over and against a possible transcendent one. Now, of course, there are echoes of transcendence all around us in our culture, but fundamentally, those are the conditions we live in. So as we grow and are socialized in the world around us, the possibilities of transcendence are narrowed. Some people think like moving from childhood to adulthood, you kind of demystify your life. And these have a profound effect on the way in which we live out our faith in the whole of life. So we may still feel a strong connection with God in worship, in prayer, when we're going for a walk in nature, but not necessarily on the bus, or not necessarily at the start of a work meeting, or not necessarily at a concert. So what I want to walk through is how do we find and follow God in our everyday life, if that is the conditions. And the story I want to anchor this around is Moses and the burning bush. When Moses saw the burning bush, he was busy doing something else. He was minding his flocks. He didn't go out into the desert to seek an experience with God, although that often happens in biblical stories. He was literally minding his own business. He was going for a coffee. He was walking to the office. He was meeting up with some friends. He was doing something else. And I wonder whether out of the corner of his eye, he saw this burning bush. And then he noticed something different. You'll be familiar with the story that the bush was not being consumed by fire. The fire was there, but the bush wasn't being burnt up. So he noticed the burning bush when he was doing something different. And actually, a bushfire in that part of the world at that time wasn't unnatural, wasn't unnormal. So it took a process of noticing for Moses to realize that something different was here. And then at the end of that noticing, we have the phrase, "Take off your shoes because you're on holy ground." We know we follow a God who is present everywhere. We know we follow a God who is in our lives and active in our world. But where and how do we notice God's presence? Where and how do we get these moments when we might think, I need to take off my shoes now because this is a holy moment. This is holy ground. And I'm talking about moments. There's a great book called The Power of Moments. You can't see it, can you? Because there's a blue screen, it disappears. Which sparked some thinking about this for me. We live faith moment by moment. We live faith in the moment. And I've got two stories to illustrate this. So my first story is about finding dog in everyday life. We all have moments in our life that are awful. We have moments in our life that are adventurous. We have moments in life that are exhilarating. And those moments form key parts of our memories. And one way I think is helpful to find and follow God in everyday life is to think about when we experience some of these moments, to actually try and take stock and think, where is God in this moment? My story of the dog was I was having a particularly bad time. This was a few years ago now. And I went and sat on a park bench and was just feeling thoroughly miserable with life in general. I looked up and this black Labrador came walking over the field. I couldn't see the owner. I couldn't see where it was. Came right over to me, put its paw on my knee and just sat there. And I felt the presence of God. Somehow that dog broke into that. And yes, they're loving creatures and they do that naturally. But for me, that was a moment where suddenly it unlocked a sense of God's presence in my life. So the first thing about living faith moment by moment is when we experience something, whether it's stress, whether it's exhilaration, whether it's a profound experience of change, whether it's a success point, when we feel these moments, take stock and just say to ourselves, is this a burning bush moment? Where is God here? What am I noticing about what God is doing, what God is saying to me in this moment? So faith moment by moment, so live in the moment, take the moments. The second one is a story about keys. We have a friend who is actually exploring a calling to the religious life at the moment. She came to our house. She's a good friend. She's godparents to our kids, one of our kids. And my wife wanted to mark this transition for her. She's stopped being a vicar and she's exploring going into a religious order. And part of that was handing over all her keys. So she'd got to a point in her life when she didn't have any keys for anything. She didn't have keys for a car. She didn't have keys for a house. She literally handed all those things back. And so we created a little ritual, which we called the ritual of the keys, where we marked the fact that she had given up keys. Imagine a life without a key. It's something that we're always around, even if you lost them and you're looking for them. So we had to mark it, or we felt it was right to mark it, that this transition needed marking. So we look for God in the moments, but also we make moments by which we can mark God's presence with us, both in our daily life of prayer, but also around us in daily life. And there's another fantastic book called The Liturgy of the Ordinary by Tish Harrison Warren, which is full of examples of how to mark moments in our day and turn our everyday life into liturgy. One of them is a blessing through emails. Every time you hit send, send a blessing alongside the email. There's loads of things. There's another one about toast. Whenever I eat a piece of toast, I'm always reminded of a prayer gathering we used to have with kids before school, and it triggers a prayer for the kids in our lives. So make moments as well as take moments, and we'll notice where our burning bushes are in our lives and where God is present. Take a moment and make a moment. So in summary then, and I'm doing this so we might have a bit of time for some questions, finding and following God in everyday life isn't normal. It is unusual. We grow up in a world where that is squeezed out of our experience and squeezed out of our understanding. And yes, we are reinforced by our participation in church communities. We have engagement with God in worship. We are nurtured by God in communion. All of those places are rich and valuable. But if we want to extend that into our everyday lives, we have to live faith in any moment. We have to be aware of where those burning bushes might be. It might be in an awkward conversation. It might be in an exhilarating conversation. It might be in a concert, might be on a mountaintop, might be in the middle of a presentation. Live faith in any moment. Notice where the burning bushes are and make moments for marking faith. Turn your everyday life into a liturgy. Look for the things that you can do in your day to give a rhythm. Look for the signals that you can send to yourself and others about where God is present and where our lives are changing in his presence. So one final plug as I finish. For more on prayer or other aspects of faith in the whole of life, in a few days' time, next week, we're launching a digital portal called Everyday Faith. from the Church of England. And this portal will have lots of examples of liturgy in the ordinary. We've got a series coming out on finding God in songs, in current contemporary songs, and listening to the lyrics of those and using those to trigger our imagination. We've got journeys coming up for prayer at work, or reflections from the lectionary to start your week thinking about the world of work and how work is meaningful and important to God. We've got stuff for doing at home with friends and family. So if you click on that now and sign up, you can do, but my colleagues tell me don't, please, because it's not working fully. But from Monday next week, you can go there and download digital journeys that will be delivered to your phone. You can look at through the web portal on your phone or on your laptop, and journey with us in everyday faith. So it's been brilliant being with you now. I'll stop share. I just wanted to see if there are any questions from the types of things I've talked about, which hopefully Matt can reflect back. And then I've got a couple of other things that we'll come back to if there aren't much more things.
Nick, thank you so much. Fabulous to hear from you. Wonderful stories as well. Very, very thought-provoking and so important as well. And I just wondered, Nick, Everyday Faith, one of the partners for Stronger 2022, and just wondered whether you could tell us a bit more about, you shared about some resources coming out next week. Tell us about the journey of how the Church of England developed Everyday Faith in the first place. Yeah,
brilliant. Thank you. So a few years ago, there was a report the Church of England brought out called Setting God's People Free, which highlighted that for the Church of England, we often focus on ministry roles as being important and church projects, social action as being important, but we undervalue how, as the laity, as the people of God, we're called to serve God in the whole of life. And so we set a program of work around that to try and work out how do we change our culture so that understanding that we're all called to serve God's mission in God's world is just part and parcel of what being in the Church of England is all about. The being of church alongside the doing of church, as we often talk about it. And as we began that journey, the term everyday faith cropped up as an easy way of saying, what's this all about? Well, this is about just encouraging us to have an everyday faith, to have a faith that isn't just on a Sunday. For some people, that's a part of their journey. And for others, it's to have faith that's about living in the everyday. It's about seeing, we might have callings to leadership roles, we might have callings to church projects or mission projects, but actually, where are our callings in daily life and how do we notice those callings? So we've been doing that for a few years now. We've had about 2,500 churches work with us, and we're at the stage now of beginning to say, we think we've got some good resources. We think we've got some good ideas to support you. So we're opening up a bit more for others, individuals and churches, to kind of join us on this journey of everyday faith and explore and innovate around the things that help us to understand how we do that more fulsomely.
So those 2,000 churches, were they specifically identified to as pilots to engage with the resources? Or I'm just thinking about how can people that may be listening today, how could they access and engage with the materials? Is it simply there are resources there for people to tap into if they want and go to a certain level that's relevant for them?
Yeah, so if you go to the Church of England websites /everyday faith, you can find links through to the resources there. The portal is going to be the main one for individuals, and then for church leaders, we've got a church support hub, we call it, and that's the website for it. And on there, we've got resources for how you can change your liturgy, how you might want to do small groups, a whole range of stuff that churches can pick up. But of those churches, some we went to as pilots and said, could you help us work out, how to celebrate and mark faith in the whole of life more holistically? Others just joined in, and we had some fantastic innovations from people just changing the way we do things in church. So beginning in, if you're formal Anglican churches, starting with some conversations about where's God been in your life this week? How can we pray and support each other as everyday disciples? And in Canterbury Diocese, we had a good dozen churches that just started in their PCC before their PCC meetings, just being more authentic in sharing about where faith was in their lives. And it was actually probably the clergy that were more terrified about opening up those questions than it was the people who were there. So we've had loads of different types of churches join in. Just the other day, I was talking to Holy Trinity Boar Lane in Leeds, which is a new church plant, which has been specifically put there to serve the city centre and to be a place where people can come on their lunch breaks and their coffee breaks if they're working in the office, meet with other people, other Christians who are working in the city, pray for each other and build a network of Christians there. So there are different types of expressions through the Church of England, and other churches are doing stuff as well with missionary disciples in the whole of life. But we're certainly trying to join in on the party of that.
What would you say to someone who, attends church on a Sunday? They may plug in at some point during the week, but really the majority of their week is spent not in the church building, not in the parish, but at work, in the community or beyond. They have to go to train, they have to commute to get to the office or whatever. What would you say to those people in terms of living out their faith? Yesterday we had someone reflecting on how it's, amazing to think about how their work in business is a ministry. I just would love to encourage our people. I just wondered, what might you say to people who are living out their faith, not in the church building, for the majority of the week?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the kind of key in our imagination. So the first thing that Taylor says is that actually our imagination is flattened. So we don't naturally see and walk in an imagination that sees God present with us in our daily lives. So that's the first challenge that we kind of go through life not noticing those things, as I've just talked through. But then actually thinking about the notion of vocation, we tend to close that down to ministerial roles or roles that are aligned to the life of the church. So it's opening up our imagination to see our callings in daily life as being the place where God has put us to be God's people in those places. Kind of Esther type stories. For such a time as this, I'm in this company, or I'm in this group of friends, or I'm on the sideline of this kids' football team with those parents. That those are all places. I mean, LICC call them our front lines. They're all places where God puts us to be God's people and to show and demonstrate the love of God. But much more deeply than that, if we're going to see the kind of kingdom transformation in our society that the Bible lays out for us, that has to be undertaken and seen through the whole of society. It has to be present in politics. It has to be present in commerce. It has to be present in the way we treat the environment. And those are the places where we live and work. So as Christians, our calling is to be salt and light in those places and actually see where God's kingdom is incoming, and whatever our influence is, whatever our role is in those places, to join in with that, and to understand that sense of vocation and calling to God's earth is fulsome. It's not just into specific roles in specific places.
It may be someone listening and they're at the office, or maybe not at the moment, but in normal times they'd be in the office, and they may feel like they're quite alone as a Christian in that place. Any practical advice for someone in that situation, what they might do to be salt and light in that context?
Yeah, well, the first thing is what you're doing, Matt. Network together. The stronger network is, does what it says on the tin. It's a bit of a Ron seal. It's that we are stronger as a network together. So connect with others is the first thing to do, either in a network like this. There's a great organization called Transform Work UK, and they put work-based fellowships together. So you can start that and connect with other Christians. But I think beyond that, it's that sense of you're not alone in that you will have colleagues with you who are, even if they're not believers, they may share some of your values. So as you start talking about that, you might find some allies there. But even if you feel quite isolated in terms of the way that you're doing things, through those networks, being able to take those tentative first steps, not just sharing your own faith, but actually putting together the connection between, where am I motivated by my faith in this particular context. There's a great story of a police officer who's an armed response officer, diplomatic service officer. This is an LICC story from called The One About. If you Google that, you'll find the stories on the website. And you'd think that's a kind of vocation. Being a police officer is, seen as being a vocation, a job. But in reflecting with others, he identified that one of the things he always did was if there was a conflict situation in the workplace, in the locker room, on a job, he was the person that would try and calm things down, reconcile people together. And in talking with other Christians, someone said, "Hey, you're a peacemaker, not just in your job, but actually in your character." And when he made that connection, he suddenly began to see, yeah, okay, I see how God uses me in these places. So that would be something to talk through with friends and colleagues, other Christians. How does my character, how do my skills, how am I using these for God's kingdom? How is God taking those and making them something more meaningful, rather than just the things that I'm good at? So making those connections, I think, is critical for people.
Nick, you've embarked on a massive program of change for the Church of England. This great tanker of an organization. That's no small project. That's no mean feat. And I just love to know, thinking about leadership and, leaders lead change often. And just wondered if you have any insights or practical things that you've learned in the process so far of bringing change through this project that may be applicable to other leaders.
Yeah. I mean, the Church of England isn't so much a big tanker trying to turn around. It's a flotilla of ships held together by string. So we're trying to do that in a way in which actually, we're holding ourselves together, as a diverse organization. I think there are a couple of things that we've learned that are important. In leadership terms, the most important thing leaders can do is model the behaviors you want to see. So if you want to have a team that's open and honest, as a leader, you need to be vulnerable, open, and honest, and have those conversations. If you want to be part of a church culture that values faith in the whole of life, then you need to be the instigator of asking questions, showing interest about faith in the whole of life, and making sure that that's on your radar and continually on your agenda. And so modeling behaviors as leaders is vital. And that's trite phrase, be the change you want to see, but it's true. So we focus on that with a lot of leaders, and they've talked about the real benefits and insights when they've started doing that and seeing a change. Visiting people in workplaces, if you're a church leader, just asking curious questions, those kind of things work. The other thing that's really important in any change program is what people call ease of first step. So we talk about small shifts for a big difference. So if you're trying to move a church culture, what's a small step that you can do? So do you introduce a testimony slot, like at this time tomorrow slot in your service? Do you change the way you pray to make sure that you are more keyed into praying for the whole of life? Do you change your church website to reflect a story every month or so of a Christian in your congregation and how they feel called to serve God alongside the projects that you might be profiling? So those small shifts become really, really important and small shifts make a big difference, and it's small shift after small shift that changes the culture. And the same thing would be true in the work context, that if you're trying to shift the culture of a workplace into a direction that you feel God is moving or more connected with the kingdom, it's finding that first small shift and then beginning to start seeing, actually we might do that. So one of our Transform Work UK partners, one of the things they encourage, as you form as a Christian group, you don't form a holy huddle, just there kind of hunkered down. You actually then formally join your diversity and inclusion networks, so that you're out there and you're known as a Christian group. And one of the practices they ask you to do is to email your executive team regularly to say, how can we pray for you? And then to do that. And the stories that have come back from, big firms, big IT firms and local government firms have been that those senior managers really, really value that. And the responses that they get back, they're not all positive, but are largely positive. So small steps are really, really important, and modeling the behaviors that you want to see.
Nick, you may need to nip off to the next thing, but it's so good to spend time with you, and thank you for all that you're doing. I was going to ask you about the learning communities that you're taking diocese through, because I thought that was really inspirational. But I don't know if you have 30 seconds just to give.
Yeah, definitely got 30 seconds to do that. So over the last 4 years, we've 29 dioceses who've joined with us in learning communities. So a team of people from a diocese, senior leaders, some clergy, some ordinary people thinking about the different dimensions of faith in those parts of the world. And it's a very simple process of thinking about where we are now, where do we want to be, and how do we get there, which is the format of any learning community. But the change that they were looking to try and see is how in our part of the world do we talk about and instill a culture of faith in the whole of life. And each of those dioceses have done it in very different ways. Some have completely, ripped up their strategy and started over and put discipleship right at the heart of that. Others were already on that journey and have found ways to kind of tweak that or make that much more intentional in how they're doing things. And that community now continues, a thing we call the Disciple Enablers Network. And those people in the diocese meet with other organizations, partners who are interested in the faith of the whole of life. And we hope over the next year that we'll build a really strong kind of organization, kind of organized community who want to see a change and a difference in the Church of England, but not just in the Church of England, so that when we think about who we are as church, we think as much of the being of church and the whole of life as we think about the doing of church. And I think we're on that change journey already, and it's really exciting to be on it.
Nick, it's fabulous work you're doing. Thank you so much for spending a bit of time with us. And God bless you in all you're doing and for the rest of your day. Thank you for being here.
Brilliant.
Nick Shepherd,
Thank you,
everyone.
Good to be with you. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.